All right. So whenever it's like, oh, share your testimony, I don't really know what that means. Um, so this might not be what people are looking for, but it's what I came up with. So when with my family and growing up, there's a lot of like um, interesting opinions about religion and a lot of conflict involving religion and stuff like that. Um, my whole mom's side of the family was raised Catholic, um, but there was a lot of issues that came with that. Um, and my mom and most of her siblings kind of just don't like do anything with their faith because they just like couldn't get behind all of the like the rules and the rituals and just all that. And even as soon as I was um, born, there were problems. Because my mom's family was raised Catholic, my dad's family was raised Christian, and my grandma was super, 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 super religious. And when I was born, she got very upset and got my dad upset um, about what I was going to be baptized as because no way in hell was her grandchild going to be a Catholic because all of the Catholic priests touch children, was the argument. And so my parents, in order to avoid like full on family battles, basically said and decided, and they stuck to this as I grew up, they decided that they were going to let me make my own choices when it came to religion. And that they weren't going to baptize me as anything. They weren't going to like outright teach me one way or another. They were going to let me just sort of have my freedom and explore that as I chose to explore it. And then whatever choice I made for myself is what they would respect. And so there wasn't a lot of religious teaching at all in my house because of that. I was given a Bible, and every single Christmas, for the majority of my life, my grandma brought me a Bible as a Christmas present, and would sing those like cheesy like kid songs that I guess they teach in Sunday school, like This Little Light of Mine, and
That's not cheesy.
there's a couple other ones, but that was the one that I like remember. But she would always come over and she would sing those over and over. My mom almost every night would sit down before bed with me and my brother, and my dad was not involved, but my mom would say the Lord's Prayer with us, and then we would go to bed. That was like our bedtime routine. And then that was pretty much the extent of like my like family exposure to who God was. So I essentially had no clue. I was like aware that God existed. I was aware that God was a thing, but that was about it. And I've always had really, really, really bad nightmares, even as a kid. Terrible nightmares. I probably have 90% nightmares, 10%, 5% regular dreams, and 5% I don't dream at all. but most of the time I have nightmares and they're very vivid and I can remember them really distinctly. And I remember one of the first times I started going to God for safety. I was a kid and I had been telling my grandma about these nightmares and how I was always like scared at night and scared in my bed. And she told me that if I prayed to Jesus and asked Jesus to keep me safe, that I would be safe and nothing could hurt me. Um, and I probably started doing that when I was 6 or 7. Um, and that was like my first exposure to like praying, I guess, and um, like going to God for something, and it was usually for safety. So then as I grew up and like more stuff happened in my life, a lot of like scary stuff happened in my childhood and in my life, and I feel like it always sounds like really silly, but I I remember like looking back on it as who I am now. I can see all the moments in which God was telling me that He was there. Because there'd be something really serious going on, something really scary going on. And in those moments where it was like so fearful and everything, um, I would just like my last resort instinct, I guess, was to pray to God and ask Him to help and ask Him to keep me safe or my family safe or my brother safe or whatever was going on. And I just remember vividly every time that happened, whatever it was that was scaring me, whatever it was that was causing the danger, it would almost immediately stop, like almost instantly. And it was every single time. And I sometimes when I tell people about that, it's like in my head I start trying to like over rationalize it and be like, well, you were a kid and like it just stopped and like all this stuff. But like I really feel like that was always God's way of being like, I'm here, I hear you, like I'm here. Um, so yeah, but I never like got to a point of developing a relationship with God, or finding out more about Him because my family was very like anti-church. Um, my family has a saying of like you can worship God just as well in your home as you can in a church, which I don't agree with at this point in my life. But um, so I kind of adopted that attitude and adopted kind of like an anti-church attitude. And then the few times that my family family took me to a church, the churches that I went to, I just wasn't. We weren't treated well, and especially me, like as a kid, I was always kind of treated like, oh, she's the unbaptized kid. Just like stick her over here so she's out of the way. Or just like people being rude or outright mean or um yeah, I never had good experiences in church. And so I started really being angry at church and at religion and feeling like there was so much hypocrisy in church of like, oh, church is supposed to be these loving and kind people, and like just because I don't go to church, they're not kind to me. Like that's not kindness. That's not loving. Um, and so I was like very much at that point, like in my teens, against church and against religion. And I would say, like, I believe in God, but I don't believe in church. And that was like my thing for many, many years. Um, and it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that that eventually changed. Um, when I got into high school, I did start getting more curious about religions in general. Middle school and high school, I was getting more curious about religions in general. Um, Asking other people about their religions and just like dabbling here and there in different things. I had like played around with um, being Wiccan for a little bit before I was just like, this is stupid. Like, this isn't real. This is dumb. Um, and so I was just trying to like figure out what I wanted because, you know, I knew my parents had given me the freedom to figure out what I wanted and I wanted to figure that out. And so then in high school in my junior year, I got into a relationship where um, he was a Christian and basically was like that, you know, my faith is really important to me and I'm not going to force you to go to church all the time if you don't like it, but I do need you to go at least once with me. And then if you don't like it, you don't have to go ever again, but you have to go at least once. And so I was like, okay. And so I showed up at First Baptist and I listened to Jeff's sermon. And it was a very surreal and weird experience because I was not expecting to like it. I was just going to like check a box and to never have to go back again. Um, but everybody was so nice and so welcoming, and the people were like normal. Um, and then I heard Jeff's sermon, and it felt like he was like talking directly to me and like on the life circumstances that I was going through like at that time. Um, and so I walked away from that day, and it was like, um, that wasn't so bad. Like that was all right. Maybe I'll come back a couple times. And so I came back a couple times, and a couple times turned into lots of times, and lots of times turned into every week. And then I was I went with Jeff on the church plant, and then I had this whole church family, and I was starting to like be asked to be part of like serving and stuff. And then I finally had a moment of like, I want to be baptized. Um, and I don't really know how I got to that point. Um, but at some point, I was just like, I need to be baptized. And so I talked to Jeff and I got baptized in his hot tub, which was great. It was nice and warm. And I get to say I was baptized in a hot tub. And it felt a little weird because I feel like a lot of my family, I can't say that word tonight, family didn't understand why I was doing it or like why I suddenly became so invested in church stuff. I feel like I was kind of like the oddball, the black sheep a little bit. But at that point, it was like, well, that's not what's important to me. What's important to me is this like faith that I'm building. What's important to me is this religion that I'm not religion, but this relationship that I'm building for myself with God. Um, but I still struggled with a lot of things. And the things that I struggled with were once I came to start knowing who God was, and once I joined this church, I felt like I was left behind. Or maybe not even left behind, but I felt like I was behind. I felt like all of these people that I knew and had built relationships with and had become friends with, and I was going to Bible studies with these people, and I'm immersed in this church culture now, but I felt behind because people were like quoting Bible verses and talking about this section of the Bible or that section of the Bible, and talking about these things that I hadn't experienced. I know that for a long time I was like really envious of Regina because she always talks about how like she talks with God and how she has like these conversations with him, and like it was something that was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing, that's so beautiful. Why don't I get that? Like, am I doing something wrong? It was always like, what am I doing wrong, or what have I missed out on that I'm not getting these things? And like sometimes the way people would talk about prayer or like lots of faith stuff, a lot of um church language stuff, I just didn't get. And um and so I felt like left out. I felt like because I hadn't grown up in a church, because I hadn't had so much time to like be taught these things, that I was just like missing out on it. And I'd have to do all this catch up to like get to where people my age are. Um, and I think at some point I had asked Andrew burped. I think at some point I, I had mentioned to Andrew, I was like, I feel like I need to like join the freaking like children's Sunday school so that I can like catch up to where everybody else is and learn all these things that I was supposed to learn and didn't because I didn't grow up in church. Um, and yeah, and so that was pretty difficult when I was like first starting out, and for a while after, to be honest. And I still sometimes struggle with it. I still sometimes wonder if I'm not doing something right, or I haven't caught up to where I'm supposed to be, or whatever. Um, but uh, in terms of like stories of like before and after, um, I know some people have these, super dramatic stories of, oh, I was into drugs, or I was this, or I was that before I came to Christ, and then I came to Christ and all of that changed. And I do feel like I have a dramatic like before and after, but I don't think it was instant. I don't think it was like as soon as I came to Christ, I was suddenly a different person. Um, I feel like God changed my life in like big chunks. And I feel those chunks were pretty dramatic. but but it wasn't like all at once. I feel like I was, when I first came to Christ, it was sort of like God was like, all right, let's do this. This is what you signed up for. Let's do it. And then from then on, it's been like these big dramatic periods where like some aspect of me is being focused on. I was definitely at one point a huge pushover. I was very codependent. I was very much um, kind of at the will of everybody other than myself. Um, and I went through some like pretty awful like relationship stuff with people in my life, but I came out the other end of it with, actually having a backbone for once and being able to set boundaries and tell people no, and starting to learn to respect myself more, and starting to, set boundaries for how people are allowed to treat me. Um, and I think that set a really good foundation for my relationship with Andrew. And I am that cheesy person who I will absolutely tell anybody who will listen that Andrew was absolutely a gift that God gave me. And my world and my perspective on things changed so much after I started dating Andrew. And so that was like one big dramatic chunk of my life. And then shortly following that was a big dramatic chunk of my life where God kind of attacked me being married to my work and the job that I was doing, and how I put so much stake in working and pleasing the people at work who weren't, doing the right things or treating me right, that it was affecting my ability to go to church. I was getting barely any time to go to church. And then even when I was in church, I would get calls from work that I had to come in right then, and I would leave church and miss church. And it just really wasn't healthy. And uh, I finally conceded to like quitting. And at the same time that I was like quitting, this whole huge drama thing happened, and I was basically like, either I work my 2 weeks and I leave, or they fire me. And so I definitely feel like it was God being like, you're leaving and you're not coming back. So, like, this is it. Like, I'm not dealing with you being so stubborn. Um, and that's something that I've kind of noticed, like, through all of the, like, big chunks in which God's worked with me, is that, like, I'm very stubborn, and it very unfortunately comes to the point of needing like these big dramatic events for me to get my head out of my butt, and pay attention and listen, um, and um, I got married to Andrew, obviously, and and which has been amazing and wonderful. But shortly after we got married, I took a huge dive with my mental health. And so that was another big chunk of my life where things changed dramatically. And I finally got help for my mental health. And I started, going to therapy for the first time, and um, finding answers and getting better and finding ways to like have coping skills and getting some answers to like why I am the way that I am. And one of those things is that I have shared before, I have BPD, borderline personality disorder. And one of the big things with that is that I feel emotions really, really intensely. Um, my emotions are more likely to fluctuate rapidly. Um, I basically have no emotion regulation at all. Um, and that causes a lot of issues. And luckily, I've been through therapy, do a lot of intensive therapy for it, and it's really helped. And I'm much more stable now, even though I'm still very emotional. And one of the things that I've struggled with God is knowing that it's something that's permanent. Um, and there's times where I can see the good in it. Um, I've shared with a couple people before that with the way that you feel things so strongly with this disorder, that includes negative emotions, quote unquote negative emotions, and positive emotions as well. So as much as I, feel sadness and loneliness and anger and like all these things really extreme on one side, I also feel joy and happiness and love equally as strongly on the other side. And because I feel love so strongly, and because I can think of like God gave us emotions, God has emotions, like God experiences all these emotions too. Like anger isn't necessarily a bad thing, the emotion itself. God gets angry, Christ gets angry. Um, but the thing that I've thought about is like if I feel love so strongly, maybe the way that I feel love is obviously not the same as, but maybe it's close to how Christ feels love for all of us, which I find is like a really beautiful thing. Like, how cool if I could feel that. I don't know if it's true, but like, how cool if I could feel something that's close to how God loves us, his children. But the other side of that is the part that I struggle with, and it's when I have slumps of depression and I have these times where my emotions are just so overwhelming and I cause issues. Um, Sometimes I struggle with being like, why do I still have to experience this? Why am I stuck with being like this forever? What is it about me, or what is it about the things that I need to learn and do and develop as a person that I still have to go through all of this? Like, haven't I gone through enough? Like, why was I picked? Why do I have to deal with this stuff? Why can't God make it go away?
Get you any tissues.
No, it's fine. Emotion regulation. And kind of coming up to current day, that's something that I'm still struggling with. I feel like I'm constantly learning how to better communicate with God. I feel like I'm constantly developing a better relationship with God, and I feel like I'm constantly growing and improving, and I'm really happy for that. And I feel like I have like a very genuine need and curiosity to like figure stuff out. And um I sorry. I have tried really hard to like read the Bible, and I've gotten stuck in parts, but like I'm trying really hard, and I really try to invest myself in Bible studies. because I want to understand, I want to learn, I want to know God. So I think that that's great. But I think where I'm at right now with my faith journey is that um, despite all this growth that I've done, I obviously like still have a lot of growing to do. And I think, like I said, some of the positives are that like I communicate a lot better with God now. I have my prayer journal. And I'm praying more than I ever did, and I feel like I'm finally learning how God speaks to me and all that. And I feel like I'm doing better with understanding that like God doesn't speak to everybody the same way. So it's not necessarily that I'm doing something wrong or that, I'm not being faithful enough or I don't have enough faith or anything like that. It's just that God speaks to me differently and that's okay. And he speaks to me in the ways that I will actually listen. Which just apparently are very big dramatic changes in my life. But also lots of feelings. I'm sorry, Joel. I know it's like everything in today's day and age is like feelings. And that's really hard to like explain and defend when you're talking to people about why you believe what you believe. But I definitely get a lot of feelings from God, and I definitely get pushed in directions based off how I feel about it. And I'll feel very strongly towards something, and I know I'm being pushed in that direction. So a lot of how I communicate with God on like small things is like I just feel it. I don't know. But I'm kind of learning what that is and how it differs from my own feelings. But on the other hand, the things that I'm struggling with currently in my faith is like I was saying, like accepting and understanding why I still have to go through a lot of the things that I'm going through when I've already been through so much. And mine and Andrew's journey with infertility has been a big one of those things. I have heard so many times about people who are just telling stories and trying to be supportive and helpful about how like, oh, this person or that person that I know, like they went through a similar thing and they, experienced all this stuff and they had 6 years of infertility and they did X, Y, and Z. And then when they finally just gave it to God and stopped trying, then they got pregnant. Or like, oh, and then they got to the end of it and they realized that God was trying to push them for adoption and adoption is their journey. And it's like, okay, that's nice. But like me and Andrew are like already before we even got married, when we talked about like, okay, if we get married, do we want kids? We talked about adopting. And we talked about like how that would be really great and that we want to adopt at least one of our kids at some point. And we were talking about like how many kids we wanted. I said 4, he said 3. We said we'd get to 3 and talk about it, so I want 4. And we talked about like, oh, have 3 kids and adopt the 4th, or have 2 kids and adopt 2 more, or 1 more, or whatever. So like we didn't need to go on this journey to accept adoption because we already accepted it. And if it was a matter of like being told by a doctor like, oh, you can't have kids, I'd be like obviously I'd be upset and I would grieve. But then I'd be like, okay, so what's the next step? Like, let's adopt. Let's, whatever. So like I'd be okay with either of those outcomes. So why do I still have to go through the process and suffer through the process when I feel like these end results that people are saying that they went through on their like journey with God and with infertility, like why do I still have to go and experience the same pain when I feel like I'm already accepting of either outcome? Um, because I'm not being told by doctors that like I can't have kids. I'm being told like, oh, we think you can, and then it's not working. So I'm struggling with that, and obviously I'm gonna always continue to get depression and anxiety, and I, have discovered that I have ADHD, and that comes with its whole own list of um, mental health struggles and issues and stuff that goes along with that. And I'm still in therapy, but I struggle taking it to God, because I don't understand why I have to continue to go through it. And these are things that I'm gonna deal with for the rest of my life. So like, why do I have to spend my whole life dealing with it? Another thing that I realized very recently that I'm still working on in like my journey is I had very like manipulative, well, I don't know if that should be online, but I I don't didn't have great parental relationships growing up. And a lot of the things that I learned with dealing with my parents became very ingrained and natural and very much like survival instincts. And I realized recently that I tend to treat God the same way because we always relate God to He's the Father, right? We're His children, He's the Father. It's a very, um, parent child dynamic. And in a lot of ways, that's pretty accurate. Um, but when you don't have a good parental example as a child for what a good father is supposed to be, let alone the perfect father, it makes it really difficult learning to interact with that father without treating him like he's the parents I experienced. It's very difficult to interact with God and not feel the same way about God that I would feel about doing the exact same thing with my parents. I feel like I do a lot of people pleasing with God, as like an attempt to like not anger him, which isn't necessarily something I need to do, but it's what I know. So I've been really trying to dissect that, and pick that apart. There was one other thing, and now I'm forgetting it. Yeah, I don't really know what else to talk about or what else to say. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I guess I'll just say that that's about it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.